Latin Quarter, and Jean-Paul Sartre sat at his table in the Café de Flore, with Simone de Beauvoir at the next table writing his philosophy. The singer in her black outfit and the café philosopher on the Boulevard Saint-Germain joined the Eiffel Tower and Notre Dame among the tourist sites of Paris. But Sartre didn't sell out. It was not in his nature to conform to anything, let alone fame and success, bourgeois concepts reeking of bad faith. He continued with his philosophical development, as ever writing, novels, plays, articles, books. And when his podgy, hopelessly unathletic body began to falter under this constant driving, he resorted to the chemical life. Working all day, every day, arguing and drinking into the early hours, Sartre kept himself going on uppers and downers. To keep his mind ticking, turn it off, wind it up again, and every now and then set off the alarm. Then the beaver would take him on vacation, discreetly disappearing while he entertained his latest intellectually dazzled young existentialist. Sartre believed in being unpredictable. Indeed, his whole philosophy was posited on this. So it comes as something of a surprise that his philosophical development had all the unpredictability of a runaway steamroller. Beginning from an almost solipsistic individuality, it became increasingly engaged with the world, society at large, the political situation. Engagé was to become another existentialist buzzword. After the useless passion of being and nothingness, and the first outreachings of existentialist psychoanalysis, existentialism flowered into a humanism. L'existentialisme est un humanisme is Sartre's clearest exposition of existentialism. Within a few years, this 30-page work had been translated into every major world language. It contains the usual pithy slogans of quasi-nihilistic defiance. We are alone, without excuses. That is what I mean when I say that man is condemned to be free. Previously, Sartre had seen this freedom as gratuitous. Indeed, it seemed to encourage that notorious French concept, the acte gratuit, an impulsive, spontaneous action heedless of the consequences. Fortunately, this self-indulgent menace appeared more in literature than in life. For example, the character in Guides, The Counterfeiters, who spontaneously pushes a passenger from a speeding train. Such acts, and the gratuitous existential freedom they exhibited, were said to be asocial. They showed how the true individual existed outside society, beyond its mores. Judges tended to a similar view, ensuring that the perpetrators of such acts remained in this existential predicament for as long as possible. But Sartre's insistence on our gratuitous freedom was little more than his first realization of what existential freedom actually meant. It was, in a way, a purely philosophical realization. The pre-war provincial schoolmaster in Le Havre, who proposed it, did indulge in the occasional minor acte gratuit, frequently involving large amounts of beer. This made him popular with his students, but no acte gratuit prevented him from turning up to take his class in the morning. Sartre soon came to understand that although this was a tenable philosophical attitude, it was hardly a plausible social attitude. Indeed, rather than being asocial, as its proponents haughtily claimed, it was in fact just plain antisocial. In L'existentialisme est un humanisme, Sartre's understanding of individual freedom takes on a social aspect. For Sartre, this freedom now implied social responsibility. Previously, he had held that with each choice we make, we are not only creating ourselves, but implying an entire morality. From here it is only a small step to social responsibility, but it is a major step. It acknowledges the existence of others, rather than just other, and accepts that these others play a distinct role in my predicament. In choosing for himself, man chooses for all men. For in effect, of all the actions a man takes in order to create himself as he wills to be, there is not one which is not creative at the same time of an image such as he believes he ought to be. Do as you would be done by. Peace on earth to all men of good will. Such sentiments occupy a central place in the morality of Western civilization. They received their strongest philosophical backing with Kant's categorical imperative, upon which he based his entire moral system. Act only on that maxim whereby thou canst at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Sartre's morality was not original. It wasn't even existentialist, though he claimed it as such by setting it within the context of his own existential outlook on life and his conception of freedom. In L'existentialisme et un humanisme, Sartre translates this humanism as follows. Man is always outside himself. It is only by projecting and losing himself beyond himself that he makes man exist. On the other hand, by pursuing transcendent aims, he himself is able to exist. Thus man is self-surpassing, and can grasp objects only in relation to his self-surpassing. He is himself the heart and centre of his self-transcendence. In other words, man creates his own transcendent ideals, which may transcend the world, being, but are at the centre of his own transcendence, nothingness. There is no other universe except the human universe, the universe of human subjectivity. As part of his anti-bourgeois attitude, Sartre had always inclined toward radical socialist views, though he insisted, "I am not a Marxist." But as his existentialism inclined toward social engagement, he found himself identifying a similar drift in philosophy itself. He concluded that there had been only three philosophies of the modern period: that of Descartes and Locke, the forerunner of Hume, that of Kant versus Hegel, and Marxism. He soon began to see existentialism as a parasitical system living on the margin of knowledge which at first it opposed, but into which today it seeks to be integrated. In no time he was maintaining that Marxism has reabsorbed man into the idea, and existentialism seeks him everywhere where he is, at his work, in his home, in the street. By 1952, Sartre had become a Marxist. But, individualistic as ever, he refused to become a member of any political party. And perverse as ever, his chief bête noire became the Communist Party. I consider that true Marxism has been completely twisted, falsified by the Communists. Previously he had been a revolutionary for philosophy. Now he became a philosopher for the revolution. Radical movements around the world took heart from his writings. He made revolutionary pronouncements on the issues of the day. In South America, in the Africa emerging from colonial rule, even in Maoist China, Sartre's books were read and his ideas debated among intellectuals. He visited Russia and communist Eastern Europe, attempting to steer his revolutionary ideas between the rock of totalitarianism and the hard place of existential freedom. His pronouncements were used and misused by the concerned authorities and freedom movements to their own ends. As ever, Sartre's readings of the political situation bore little relation to political reality. Ideas remained his forte. Here, indeed, was a futile existence in an absurd world. But there was undeniable bravery in the position he chose to adopt. His right-minded but simplistic stance during the Algerian War of Independence against France ensured that his flat was twice bombed by French right-wing extremists. On another occasion he stood alone on his soapbox outside a car factory which had been seized by the workers, delivering a speech of solidarity through his megaphone while the armed police lined up to storm the gates. Neither the police nor the workers paid any attention to his intellectual analysis of the situation. He remained essentially a one-man band of idealistic awkwardness. But through his magazine, Les Temps Modernes, his voice spread across France, Europe, and the world. Accompanied by de Beauvoir, he met Castro, visited Prague after the Russian invasion, had tea with the commander of the Red Chinese Army. Back in Paris he continued to write obsessively, driving himself on Coridane, a legally available amphetamine-based upper. The result was Logorrhea, vast books filled with convoluted dialectical and Marxist-inspired arguments which never came to any conclusion. Sartre's last important quasi-philosophical work, Critique de la raison dialectique, translated as Search for a Method, was published in 1960. In more than 750 pages, he tried to work out his relationship to Marxism. "I believe that only a historical approach can explain man," he now maintained. His ideas echoed Marxist historicism, whose deterministic critique of the development of civilization and dialectical analysis of historical change appealed to his intellectual outlook. He remained a Marxist, but inevitably it had to be his kind of Marxism. Classical Marxism had failed to adapt to the particular circumstances of history, geography, economics, and what have you. But Sartre's main criticism of Marx himself may yet prove prophetic. In Sartre's view, Marx had not laid enough emphasis on the question of scarcity. Yet in analyzing this problem, Sartre once again let his ideas run away with him. All human relationships are governed by scarcity, he maintained. Even when there appears to be overproduction, scarcity appears in the form of a scarcity of consumers. The basic rule of civilization in its present stage of development remains kill or starve. Even the violence that leads to conflict is internalized scarcity, and so forth. Yet among all the nonsense, flashes of the old genius remained, especially in the plays he continued to write. In these the artist was better than the intellectual. The enemy, be he assassin or torturer, is often made to appear a tragic hero, trapped in a situation from which he feels there is no escape. He understands what he is doing and is responsible for his acts, but cannot do otherwise. In the words of the leading Sartrean critic Philippe Todi, such enemies are victims of their own acts and crucified by their own intentions, prisoners at the bar of history and yet with no executioner but themselves. These victims are the last representatives of a Christian sensibility in a world where God is dead, but neither history nor love can take his place. In 1964, Sartre was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, specifically for his autobiography of his childhood, Les mots, words, rather than for any of his philosophical or political writings. Inevitably, he rejected the prize, insisting, "The writer must refuse to let himself be transformed by institutions." Although suffering from increasing ill health, Sartre continued to issue intransigent political pronouncements on the events of the day in his magazine Les Temps Modernes, and to head all manner of street demonstrations against the authorities. Right-wing extremists replied with slogans such as "Shoot Sartre," and the police longed to lock him up, but he now had a friend at court. President de Gaulle magisterially recognized a fellow great man of history, and let it be known, "You do not imprison Voltaire." But by this time Sartre was not so much Voltaire as Tintin. The intellectual current of the time had passed on. New ideas were emerging, such as structuralism and postmodernism, and with them new figures, Barthes, Derrida, Foucault. Pygmies in his shadow they may have been, but Paris is also the city of fashion. These were the latest intellectual fashion of the left bank, of engaged intellectuals and of the chattering classes worldwide. Sartre was old hat. As the 60s became the 70s, Sartre increasingly paid the price for living the chemical life, his Faustian bargain which had enabled him to work harder than others and live harder than others. Attended by de Beauvoir and his faithful retinue of young existentialists, some of whom were by now mature women, Sartre became increasingly frail. The pills, the writing, the drinking, the smoking, the women. He had to cut down on them all in the end. On April 15th, 1980, at the age of 74, Sartre died. His funeral, 4 days later, attracted a spontaneous crowd of more than 25,000 followers as it made its way through the Latin Quarter, past the cafes where he had written his finest works. The denizens of the left bank, the most disrespectful audience in the world, had come to pay their last respects to the most disrespectful hero of them all. From Sartre's writings. Man is condemned to be free. Existentialism and humanism. The world of explanations and reasons is not that of existence. Nausea. The essential thing is contingency. In other words, by logical definition, existence is not necessity. To exist just means to be there. What exists simply appears and lets itself be encountered. You can never deduce it. Nausea. The first effect of existentialism is that it puts every man in possession of himself as he is, and places the entire